Hello, and welcome to the Mind by Design podcast. I'm your host, Jana Parker, licensed educational psychologist, parent coach, and educational consultant. Visit themindbydesign.com to find resources and access our services, and please follow us at The Mind by Design on both Facebook and Instagram. Welcome back to the Mind by Design podcast. I am here today with April Rehrig. I like saying your last name, Rehrig.
Thank you, Jana. Most people can't pronounce it.
Yeah, I'd practice, actually. But April is with Rise Educational Advocacy, and I'm really excited for you to talk to us today, April, about your company and the kinds of services you provide, because I like to give my families access to, usually it's community-based resources, and you, though you're not in our immediate community, can work with families kind of wherever. But even though you're not in our immediate community, you're very accessible. And I think you have things that are accessible through your website, and also you are accessible, even though you are not literally right here in my community. So I'm happy to have you come and just talk about what Rise Educational Advocacy brings to families and how it can empower them. So please tell us a little bit about your company.
So Rise Educational Advocacy, I started it because, like for many of your families, going into the IEP or the 504 process is so overwhelming. And even though I worked in schools for many years as the school psychologist, like you, Jana, and then I was a teacher, I found that families would come to the meetings and they were like, what is going on? And they would leave the meeting feeling frustrated and angry. And I thought, well, we have the tools, right? The teachers do, but the parents need tools too. They need toolkits, they need information, they need to be able to advocate, but they aren't given the same rules. And so I formulated my company to make it easier. And so that's what I do is I coach parents, I provide workshops, and I try to make the process so that you can go into the meeting, feel better, and ultimately your child can get the services they need without the drama, without the endless emails, and without the tears that we tend to get as parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I learned early on as I started working in private practice as an LEP, which for my audience is licensed educational psychologist. And I worked in private practice and was a school psychologist at the same time in a school district. And I realized how little in private practice, I realized how little parents know about the process, because why would you? You wouldn't know unless you start to have a child who may be struggling at school for some reason. And then all of a sudden, this huge can of worms is open. I mean, how many people say like, well, there's no school psychologist at my kid's school. And you're like, well, yes, there is, but you don't know because you've never had to deal with one, right? So I realized how important it was as a school psychologist then to be taking families through the process that they really knew nothing about. And it just went, it built our relationship so much better, right? Because but still there were times when it was, I don't know, there was like maybe some distrust, or, they didn't quite trust what the school district, right, was saying. But yeah, there's a huge learning curve. And so a lot of times in my private practice, we're trying to help families through this process, right? And so you are doing the same thing, but you're kind of doing it on a broader scale and making this information, I think, more accessible to families, just like on a more larger scale kind of availability, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. And so I work with families in a bunch of different states. And just for example, I worked with families in one state, and I was kind of new to working in that state. And then I started doing some research, and I thought, the family approached me and I thought, well, there has to be advocates, there has to be, organizations in their area. And I looked in their town, they had one attorney in the state, one special education attorney. And they had very limited resources. And I thought, no wonder they reached out. It didn't matter. I was all the way in California. They don't have the tools. And I thought, well, this isn't fair. So that's why I do things virtually, because There is some areas that have a ton of services. There's some areas that don't. And advocacy can be really expensive. And I felt like that was a huge barrier. And so a lot of the supports I offer are more cost effective because it shouldn't be that only the people that can afford it can get services. It should be that everybody can have access to make things easier. And it's just more equitable that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about how people find your services and what they can find when they visit your site.
So my website is riseeducationaladvocacy.com. And when you come to the website, I make it easy, like I was saying before, by offering a variety of services, whether it's free or getting my workshops or working with me directly. So families come to my website. I have a resource page where I have a ton of free downloads where they can look at, okay, here's, for example, I have blogs. Here's the difference between a 504 and an IEP. Here's what an IEE is. Here's what this means. Here's a free download. I have that option. Then I have what's called paid guides, which is where you can get an instant download to understanding a 504, how to take your IEP to college, getting a meeting toolkit. And then I have workshops, and the workshops are structured so that it kind of is almost like working with me as an advocate, but you can do it at home. So I found that really useful because when I was a parent going through the IEP process, I'd be in the pickup line running through, Google. And I was like, I need someone to tell me what to do.
Right.
So I made it really easy and quick and everything understandable so that you can walk into your meeting tomorrow with the tools. And then lastly, I have the services where parents can hire me. Unlike a regular advocate that will kind of walk into the door or sometimes slam into the door and be confrontational, I'm very collaborative and I coach families to the process because families want to do it themselves. They want to get the tools. And that's what I do is I try to make it short-term, clear, and very easy so that parents can feel empowered and they have someone support them at the meeting and they feel like they can actually do that themselves.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think know from being a school psychologist and being on that side of the table for so long, the second somebody comes in with a family, whether it be a friend, an advocate, an attorney, it just puts up some little defense flags. And it's more challenging to have that collaborative conversation. And a lot of times the people who parents bring can be a little maybe adversarial, right? And so, yeah, I mean, because I come from that side of the table too, and I really try to empower families with knowledge so that they feel like they can go into the meeting and have that collaboration themselves, because that it's all for the betterment of the kid, right? Like it's all for the child. And if parents can work that themselves, I think that's the best way. So I love your approach of giving so much of this information to them in the different ways that you're doing it, and then being available if they really need you. But your way still is collaborative because you've been there, you've been on the other side. Yeah.
Exactly. And one thing I also find true, Jana, is that I have a lot of teachers who come to me and they're parents and they're like, okay, my child goes to school in my district. I can't hire an advocate. Either I can't afford it or I can't, and I don't want to get in trouble. And so they'll take my course or my workshops because they're like, I want to learn how to do it myself. So there isn't that stigma of feeling like you're going to get in trouble. Someone's going to look at you. They're going to view you badly. There's a lot of feeling, you feel embarrassed by saying like, I need help or I want to bring someone with me, and you don't want to break that gap, especially if you're on the school campus all the time, you're in the PTA, you don't want to be the mean parent.
Yeah.
So doing it yourself feels empowering and no one has to know. You have all the tools. You can just walk in there and be like, yeah, I already know.
Yeah. 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 And I think that especially if the teacher is at the school, you don't want to seem like you're not trusting of your team. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly true. there's so much we have as parents where we place blame on ourselves, and so much that we push ourselves so hard. And extreme parenting as being a caregiver of a child with a disability is absolutely real. And so if you know, okay, your child has an IEP or they're going to have an IEP and they're 7, you're going to be in those IEPs for many years. So why not give yourself the tools and give yourself a break instead of like just beating it to the hilt? You know, it's just so much easier if you have the tools.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know why this question just popped up, and it's like a little bit off topic, but I wonder what, I'm just kind of curious as to your opinion, because a lot of times you were just talking about how, you know, if a kid has an IEP and they're 7, you're going to be in a lot of meetings. And I feel like a lot of the time that an advocate might start to come into the picture. So I have 2 questions. First is, the question I'm going to ask, and the second is, when is it time for bringing an advocate in, right? But my first question is really, if you are, I find that, and I start sentences frequently and then I don't finish them. So I'm going to try to actually finish this sentence. It's something that I'm working on. Okay. So a lot of times as kids are getting ready to potentially be exited from an IEP, is oftentimes when there's kind of some battle with, you know, internal battle, like, should I be giving this up? You know, I don't know if I want to, you know, what, I'm just interested in how you have that conversation with families, because I think it's a really important one, because I always think you get an IEP to get off of an IEP. It doesn't happen very often, but that's the purpose, right? The purpose is to get you to a point where you don't need that anymore. But how do you have that conversation with a parent about when it really is time, for them to fly on their own? I'm just curious as to.
That's a great question. I dealt with this a lot actually when I was a school psychologist working at middle schools and mostly at middle schools. I worked at high schools my last 10 years, which was I love working with high schoolers. But at the middle schools, what I found is that, well, at both settings. So at middle schools, I found students would be doing better, and then teams would say, great, you're doing good, you don't need it anymore. And then there wouldn't be the forethought of like, well, what about, they're in 8th grade, for example, what about when they go to high school? So the bigger conversation to have with your team is not, do they need to exit, but what age are they at? Are they transitioning soon? And if they have an IEP, but they're successful, do they still have pullout services? What kind of accommodations do they have? Did we try it where it's only consultation? Like, what level of support do they have and what do you really need? So for example, if you're a junior or senior in high school and you know that your child is probably going to need to access supports in college, why would you transition them, you know, to not have it anymore? So the bigger conversation for families is, when are they transitioning? Where are they doing? And then developing a vision plan where, you know, okay, 5 years, this is what my child is going to be doing, or this is what I hope they're going to be at in terms of functional independence and mastery of skills. And then kind of scaling back, well, what do I need to do to get there? So the conversations that I have with families are related to not so much the now, but what do you think in a few years? And how can we get to that point by mapping things out ahead?
Yeah, yeah, helping them feel more prepared for that. Not like, oh, we're taking something away, but more like, how do we empower you to keep this progress going?
And having the student the part of the conversation.
Yeah.
I always advocate for students in elementary school to start coming to their IEPs, which is very unusual and most schools frown upon it, but actually parents can bring their child at any time to the meeting. There's no laws preventing them from bringing their child.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So yeah, so like, when do you feel like families really do need somebody at their meetings supporting them? Or, and also, do you work with parents individually and not go to their meetings, but kind of help them behind the scenes, but on a personal level? Or do you end up then going to their IEP meetings too, always?
Those are great questions. My view is, if you are starting the process, for example, if you are building a house, why would you not equip yourself with the right tools? If you are starting down the process, and I'm sure many of your families live in a home or know someone that's been in a home, it is so overwhelming. So why would you not start from the very beginning? Advocacy should not be about adversarial. Advocacy should be about transparency and understanding. So in the health field and in many other fields, they have advocates available that are there right from the start. They're kind of like a liaison. So the question isn't so much when do you start, it's when do you want things to get easier? How quickly do you want your child to get supports?
Yeah.
So it's not so much feeling embarrassed or things have to not work to get an advocate. It's, do you want things to be easier? Do you want your child to get things that are doing well? So even if things are going well now, if your child has a disability and has an IEP, they've struggled already. So why would you leave extra room for them to fail? It's just easier if you start from the beginning. And that's where the idea of having an advocate doesn't have to be adversarial. It can be, they're here to help me. They are here to explain things. And I do work with families on the back end, whether it's either taking my workshops, or many parents will do things on their own and then come back and like send me a question and say, well, I need some help with this, and I'll support them. Or they watch me on my Instagram reels and then they'll send me a message. I had one today and they're like, well, what do I do here? And so I gave them some tips and they're like, okay, great. So just because a parent works with an advocate, at least the way that I operate, it shouldn't be that you have to hire someone. It should be that our information is easy to understand, easy to navigate. And again, it's about equity and access. And the only way to improve that is to really make things more transparent in the process.
That's such a reframe. I love that you just did that, because we really do get into this thought process like, okay, well, if you need an advocate, like ultimately, let's get you an advocate. Because it's expensive, it's cost prohibitive for a lot of people, and it brings this whole other aspect in. And I think, potentially because some people aren't being like transparent and helping, like.
Yeah, and you think about it, when you're a parent, you having your relationship with a school is very similar to a marriage. So whether you like it or not, even if you're divorced, you have to co-parent.
Mhm.
So unless you're going to sever the relationship, which would be hiring an attorney, which is where you're severing the relationship, like, I am done, I am fighting you. Even after actually you file for due process, you still have to go back unless you leave the district. So you're in it, whether you like it or not, with the school. So why not make it easier for the process? So it's really about improving your communication and when and how you communicate, and for the school to do the same. So advocacy, really, we do need a reframe and we do need reform. At the same time, schools and IEPs are just not really consumer friendly. And so they need to do a better job. And that's really where advocacy started from the very beginning, is to be that sort of liaison between the school and the parents to make things more successful.
Yeah. I mean, that's like opening up this whole, like, reform is just opening up a whole different bucket. So much
But
of
the funny
education
thing,
needs reform.
exactly. And the funny thing is, Jana, is that people talk about reform and then I'll say, well, okay, if you want to talk about reform, then where does it start? Who starts it? You can't rely on someone else. You have to do it yourself. So if you want reform, you have to take action. And it doesn't mean being adversarial, but if you want things better, you have to make a change. Just like, for example, if your child falls off a bike, you're going to let them sit there and suffer? No, it's like you're going to, work on it. So the only way that we can have reform is by people saying, you know what? I'm going to switch up my approach. Like, why am I doing this approach? So it really, reform starts with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. So you have a pretty active Instagram, which I have in the past few months more recently been privy to when I do get to open up Instagram, which I try to do. Um, but tell me about how, just the kind of information that people can find on your Instagram, because I think it's really unique.
Yeah, so I decided that when I was going to do social media, because I worked in schools for many years, and so I wasn't really savvy, I saw all these reels and posts, and most of them were for teachers or people in the profession. And there was a few for parents, but they were much more kind of like, here's the process. And I thought, well, parents want information. Why can't we just talk about it a little bit? So most of my Instagram reels are about, okay, what do you do if? Or here is this what it is, what it means. And it's really about teaching parents about the process in a minute or a 2 minute. And again, it goes back to the pickup line, right? We're all busy. We have a few minutes to scroll on Instagram. We might as well get something useful. So there's TikToks, there's all these other methods. And I really felt like Instagram getting like a minute or two, you can get a lot of information and then use that to go back. In my Instagram, I also have the ability so that if parents say, I want this guide, I send out guides, I send information that way. And so I can communicate with people who are interested and get them the tools they need free and really easy. So again, it's about that transparency and access. And it's been fascinating. I have a lot of parents who like me. And then honestly, Jana, I have a lot of people who are teachers, educators, and they reach out and they say, you know what, like, I like your page too. I really enjoy you. So I'm finding that there's this amazing community out there where people want the information and it's everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do some work with school districts too, right?
Yeah, I provide training to school districts and to organizations that are interested. I do my workshops and then I also do other things related to that because again, like providers in schools, they'll reach out to me and they'll say, you know what, like, can you help us out? And so again, it's by providing that IEP training where they feel like they really have professional development and they can ask questions and really feel comfortable instead of feeling kind of like, because if you're a teacher and you work in a school, you know this, most of professional development is it's kind of wah wah. It's not
Yeah.
really useful things you can use. And so I translate my information because I try to make it so if you're here in a PD, you're going to want to be able to go away with something you could actually use.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love even that you have so many little, like something that you can go and use tomorrow. And I know that at the best PDs are when you get something that you can go and use tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Just like, when you're a student in the class or you remember your favorite teacher, why do you remember your favorite teacher? Because they made information useful and relevant. And that's how our brains work. We want
Yeah.
something that we can get. We want stories. We want something cool. And so it goes back to teaching. So why does PD have to have I'm not saying any judgment, but like, why does PD a lot of times have to be like terrible? It's because they're not delivering the information to something that we can actually learn. So it's like, just like a great kindergarten teacher, like it helps.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Do you have any like interesting stories? Like, do you have a story that you feel like has come up recently that's been like a win for you, or just something that was like a cool situation that happened with your work?
Yeah, actually I do. So I worked with a parent the other day and they hired me and we were working together. And so I met with them and they said, you know what? I really like your approach because I had an advocate before and I didn't realize that it really matters their approach. And so they had been working with an advocate. The relationship with the school had kind of severed and they felt guilty. They felt uncomfortable and they were like, gosh, nothing, really helped. And so I met the client. We went over everything. We came up with a plan. We looked over all the paperwork. And then I came to the school and the teachers were like, wow, like this is like one of the best meetings we've had. Like there's no yelling. we got so much done. And then the parent went away and they said, this is amazing. Like, I got the IEP I wanted. It wasn't a battle. And it was actually kind of like a nice meeting. And so it was a wonderful situation because the parents had experienced services before, but they weren't satisfied. And so they felt like they had the right fit. And that's what I want to communicate to your families, is that there is a fit when it comes to finding supports, whether it's an LEP or someone else. And you can ask questions when you're interviewing someone. You can absolutely decide, like, it's not so much a service, but like, who makes the best fit for you and
Right.
your family and what you need.
Yep. Yep. I love that. Yeah. I think IEP meetings in general, especially just in the course of my career, have become something so different, over the years. Just really has become very like legal feeling. And I think we get away from the purpose of the meeting, which is really to understand and support the student. And it's like we need to get back to the purpose of it, and if we really want to help the family and the student.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I mentioned earlier about that education is a service and that parents and students are consumers.
Mm.
And I agree with you. When I started, well, I'll date myself, but 30 years ago when I started as a teacher, the IEPs were actually written by hand.
Yeah.
And most of them, even for students with significant developmental delays, it was like a 3 or 4 page document. And so as an attorney, people might look at that and say, well, gosh, there wasn't a lot of services, but from a consumer standpoint, the parent got what they needed. It was great. They got done with the meeting. And so now, as litigation has kind of increased, it's transferred things. And so that's where I go back to reform, is that we don't have to let it go like that. If you don't like your IEP forms and you're a parent, you can say, you know what, this form isn't really working for me, school district. Like, let's work on that. And so it really takes asking for help, saying what things work, because if things aren't working for your child, you absolutely can say, like, this isn't really working. Let's do this differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it's so much good information. I'm like really happy to be talking to you and to have access to all of this, and to be able to kind of like funnel families who need this knowledge and support to your site. It's very simple. And I think it will help a lot of people. I'm sure you're already helping a lot of people.
It's been fun. It's been a real adventure, and I really love it. I loved working in the schools, and now I'm like, this is so awesome.
Yeah.
So it's been a pure joy.
Yeah, it's like all that experience that we've had in the schools have led us to a place where we can help with um, something that's kind of more niche with what resonates with us individually, and serve our community in a different kind of way. And it helps us, like, we can be creative and dynamic, and we're not stuck in a system, right? We can like help reform, I guess, right? We're doing it little by
Yeah,
little, just
exactly. And I think the biggest things, the takeaway for parents is that when you go through the process, you feel like you're alone. Many, many families do not want to tell their friends their child has an IEP. They feel like they're the only one. And the truth is, you know, 1 in 52 children has autism. I mean, more than likely, several of the moms, you already know their kids have the IEP. And to find that community and to feel like you are not alone in the process, I mean, that is just, there's no replacement for feeling like you have someone there for you and someone to support you, and you are not by yourself.
yeah. I mean, and speaking of community, do you have, or are you planning to have kind of like a parent community, or is that something that you're thinking
Maybe it's coming
about?
there. We do have plans for coming that way. And
Yeah, cool.
I have some things coming through the pike, so it's
Great.
coming. Yeah, that's for sure. So you hit it on the button.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, and again, like, as we're kind of creating our own stuff right now, like being more getting to kind of be innovative and see where the needs are. We can get dynamic and inspired and create things that where we see a need. So that's awesome. Great.
Exactly.
Well, April, is there anything else that you think the audience should know? And just say again, in case people are listening and not watching, like, where do they find you?
So riseeducationaladvocacy.com is where they find us. And if they want to reach out to me or contact me or want to explore any of the services, there's usually a top section in the menu bar. Otherwise, you just go to riseeducationaladvocacy.com/contact and we can get in touch.
Perfect. And your Instagram handle?
At Rise Ed Advocacy.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And yeah, I just really appreciate it.
It's been a true pleasure. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mind by Design podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please share it with a friend. And if you haven't already, subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast player. And if you have any questions or comments or would like to be a guest on my show, you can reach me directly at jana@themindbydesign.com or just visit the website at www.themindbydesign.com. Thank you for listening, and remember, I'm here to help.